This is a shir on the Kutei Sichos Parshas Yisro. This is Chelek Chaf Aleph. Parshas Yisro. Yisro Aleph. 21st book of the Kutei Sichos. Yisro, the first Sicha. In the pasuk Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Ahar, that the Jewish people, it says that on the beginning of the pasuk is B'Chedesh Ashlishi, the third month. It says when Yisrael and Yisrael that the Jews left Egypt. On the day of Rosh Chodesh Sivan, Bo Midbar Sinai, they came to Midbar Sinai, the mountain of Sinai. And then it says, Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Ahar, they encamped there. Actually, I'll be literal translation. Yisrael camped there, opposite the mountain. So Rashi brings the words Vayichan Sham Yisrael, Yisrael camped there, and he says as follows: Ki ish echad belev echad, like one man with one heart. Abel sha'ar kol hachanoyes b'taraimes v'machlekes, but the other encampments were with quarreling or complaining and quarreling. It's going to make a difference in the end of the Sikha. The word taroimes, if you're just at this stage of the Sikha, you would just translate the same thing: grumbling and argumentativeness. By the end of the Sikha, you'll see that there's a clear distinction between the two. So, as we learned simply, the diuk, what Rashi is quoting, seems to come from the Mechilta. Again, by the end of the Sikha, you'll see that it's very possibly that the Mechilta is not the source of Rashi. What is the Mechilta saying? It says Vayichan, singular. It doesn't say Vayachanu and they camped, singular. And therefore Rashi explains, why does it say singular, which would seem to say, and he camped by the mountain? It's because they were like one person with one soul, with one heart. But all of the other, continues Rashi, but all of the other campings were with grumbling and argumentativeness. So they were. You can't call them a singularity. They were divided. They had divisiveness between them, and that's why in all other places, Vayachanu, in the whole Parshas Masim, when we read Yisro, Vayachanu, they traveled from here, they camped there, because they weren't as one. However, if that's what Rashi is quoting and basing on, we have to understand, if the whole point of Rashi is from the singular language Vayichan Loshni Yochid, so Rashi should have only in his Pirush quoted as his heading the word Vayichan, and he camped. Why does Rashi's heading say Vayichan Sham Yisrael? It brings the other two words that Yisrael camped there. So again, this is fantastic, because this is the Rebbe's way of questioning and understanding Rashi. You would look at it without hearing this from the Rebbe, you would say, okay, what's I mean, he brought all three words. No, Rashi is explaining Vayichan the way we put it forth now. Now, if you want to say that Rashi puts in Sham, Vayichan Sham, that he camped there, you could say, okay, the word there also is important, because what Rashi continues is not just that here at Har Sinai they encamped like one person and therefore singular, but all the other encampments were with grumbling and arguments. So you could say that you learn it, not like the Mechilta says you learn it from the fact that there it says Vayachanu plural and here it says Vayichan. But you would say, from Rashi, you could be that Rashi is learning it from the word Sham, that there they encamped singularly, which means there and not in other places. And actually, the truth is that only from the word Sham really do you know that they encamped, that there was unity, but there wasn't unity elsewhere. From the fact that it says Vayachanu, which seems to be what the Mechilta is saying, it says that in other places it speaks plural, you could say that that's just simply speaking. They didn't have any arguments, except that there were a variety of tribes, there were different kinds of people. Not that they had any arguments. I mean, a crowd doesn't have to be argumentative to be referred to in plural. So, really, you could say that Rashi is bringing a higher level of diuk here. Vayichan Sham, how do we know that the other places were with machlekes? Because it says that there they encamped singularly, not the other places. But from the language, Vayachanu is standard language. Yes, the community camped there. On the contrary, from the Rashi, you say, okay, so Rashi brought an extra word. What does it harm? No, the extra word Yisro is actually a little bit of a challenge to Rashi's pshat. Why? Because you could say that the singular language Vayichan is because it's talking about Yisrael, the people of Israel. So by bringing Yisrael, that actually raises a question. 1 second. You just answered Rashi yourself by bringing in the heading why it says Vayichan Loshni Yochid. It says singular because it's talking about the people. So we have these questions here. A, why does he bring those three words in the Libra Maskell? We could understand that Sham is actually a very good word to bring, because that's where we know that here there was unity, other places there weren't. But by bringing Yisrael, we reverse any benefit we've had by bringing Sham, seemingly, because by saying the word Yisrael, you now say that there's a singular people. So now, once again, it makes sense to say Vayichan. So how do we know that over here there was a unique unity that wasn't in other places? So base. The Chelek we could say that Rashi's imperative to say that is not from Vayichan, only the word Vayichan, but from this pasuk's using two different terms in describing the encampment. In this pasuk itself, it says they came to the desert, Vayachanu b'midbar, they plural camped in the desert. And then immediately in the same pasuk it says Vayichan Sham Yisrael, singular, and he camped there by the mountain. In the same pasuk, to say the same description, Vayachanu and Vayichan, to just use those two languages, plural and singular, in the same pasuk about the same activity, tells us that the Vayichan singular here is special, and it only is in terms of this encampment when they camped at Sinai. However, you have to understand, we do have elsewhere where in the same pasuk there's a singular and plural, and we don't necessarily say that it has anything special to teach us. It could be the singular is talking about the people as a collective, and the plural is talking about the individuals within that collective. For example, later on we say that the people saw the revelation at Sinai. It says Vayar ha'am, singular. The people can be singular. He saw, the people saw, Vayanu, and they trembled, Vayamdu merochik, and they stood from a distance. So you have singular and plural in the same pasuk. Similarly, in the previous parsha, where we talk about what their vision was at the mountain at the splitting of the sea, Vayar Yisrael siyad agdela, he, the collective Jewish people, saw, singular, the great hand of Hashem, Vayiru ha'am, same pasuk, and the people, they feared, Vayaminu, and they believed. So you can see, so really, if you want to say that Rashi's imperative is from the fact that the pasuk speaks in plural and then moves on to singular in the same pasuk, I was about to say in the same pasuk about the same activity. No, it wasn't the same activity. But in the same pasuk, that doesn't seem to be a proof. In the end, the Rebbe is going to point out that the fact that it's not the same activity is going to be something of importance here. Right now, that doesn't seem, we're talking generally, that doesn't seem to make a difference. We see that plural and singular in the same pasuk don't pose a special limit, don't teach us something special. So how could that be the basis of what Rashi is saying here? That Vayichan here, the singular, is telling us something special, where he himself quotes the word Yisro, which means it could be talking about the collective people of Israel in a singular, like it does elsewhere. So we have to understand still. Gimel, we also have to understand the source, simply speaking, of Rashi is from the Mechilta. With the Lashon of Mechilta, if we go back to the Mechilta, we see the language is a little different. The Mechilta says as follows: Kol mokim shoyim vayis vayachnu, any other place where it says they traveled and they encamped, noisim b'machlokas, they traveled in argumentativeness and division, v'cheinu machlokas, and they camped with divisiveness, with argumentativeness. But here they were all equal, leiv echad, with one heart. That's why it says Vayichan Sham Yisrael neged ha'har, that there, opposite the mountain, he, Yisrael, encamped. Well, it sounds like the same concept. You want to say the same drasha? It sounds like the same drasha generally. We came here to study the Rebbe's Torah. The Rebbe doesn't look at a Rashi generally. It seems to correlate to the Mechilta, but it's not copy-paste. Let's see the differences. First of all, says the Rebbe, in Mechilta it says, Kan hushva kulam lev echad. Here they were all like with one heart, but you see there's one word missing, right? Rashi says they were k'ish echad, lev echad, like one man with one heart. Mechilta just says lev echad. That's a big difference. Base. In the Mechilta it says that in all the other places they traveled and they camped with machlekas. Rashi doesn't just talk about machlekas. Rashi talks two languages. Tar oimes a machlekas, which literally means grumbling and argumentativeness. So it's not the same. There's something, and an extra thing here. Gimel in the Mechilta it says that's why it says that he, Yisrael, camped opposite the mountain. Rashi doesn't bring that neged ahar. Mechilta brings that whole pasuk. Rashi stops and he comments only on Vayichan Sham Yisrael, that Yisrael camped there. He doesn't bring neged ahar. So that's all going to point to us that there's a different activity going on. There's a different commentary going on in Rashi, which is not just copy-paste Mechilta. Dalit, we also have to understand the same content from Rashi's commentary here, but with small differences. We find Also, the way he explains our previous said, and it's in a flip thing. In the pasuk which says that Bnei Yisrael raised their eyes, they see the Egyptians, or they see Egypt traveling after them. So Rashi quotes the words Noisei Achrem, traveling after them. Noiseya doesn't say Noisim. The Egyptians should be said plural. They are traveling after the Jewish people. But it says Noiseya, he is traveling. It's one Egyptian, it was many Egyptians. And Rashi says there, Belev echad ki ish echad, with one heart, like one person. Hey, 1 second. It's the exact opposite of what it says here about the Bnei Yisrael in the mountain of Sinai, that they're like one person with one heart. So, first of all, 2 things that we have to notice. There, Rashi says, when he quotes the Pirush, he doesn't bring the word Mitzrayim. Here he brings the word Yisrael. And we understand that why he doesn't bring the word Mitzrayim, because by bringing the name of a people as a collective, that takes away the whole oomph of the Vart, that why using a singular language? Well, I'm using it because I'm talking about the people. So Rashi doesn't bring that Mitzrayim Noisei Achrem, because that would kind of be an answer. The Noisei, the singular, is going on the people of Egypt. No, so he just brings Noisei Achrem, and we know it was a multitude that were traveling after them. And about that he says, not like one man and one heart, but he says the exact opposite. So first of all, we have to understand Rashi. He doesn't quote the word Mitzrayim, and hey, the word Mitzrayim says there. So don't. But was Rashi trying to hide it from us? Because the word Mitzrayim, as we said, is a bit of a trouble to trying to explain that the singular doesn't fit. Because if we're talking about the people of Egypt, the people is one. It's a collective people. And then also, why does Rashi there bring not just Noiseya, but Achareim, after them? If Rashi is just picking up the word Noiseya, which is a singular, not Noisim, just say, quote the word Noiseya. And then, of course, the big question, you notice the difference. Ki ish echad b'leiv echad is in our parsha. There it says b'leiv echad ish echad. There it starts with a heart, like with one heart, like one people. Here it says like one people with one heart. So now the Rebbe's asked all the questions, and we're going to pull this all together. The explanation of all this. You don't have to say that Rebbe's Sikh is beautiful, but what can I say? It's like eye-opening. Opens a new vista before us. When you talk about a people, okay, a Rabbim, a group of people, or a whole nation, sometimes you can speak about it in Lashon Rabbim, in plural, sometimes in the collective, in singular. So when you want to look at the pshat, when would we talk about a people as a collective in the singular? When would we use the plural? So when we're talking about an activity, look, when you're doing an action, there can be 2 ways of doing an action. Sometimes everybody can be doing the exact same action. There's conformity. Everybody's doing the same action. So then you could talk about the people as a collective. That would fit to talk about plural, singular, because everybody's doing the exact same action. Then even when you're doing an action, sometimes it can be done in various variations and ways, through the different styles of the different people. Then it would make sense to use the plural, because there's nothing united about even the action that they're all doing. They're doing the similar actions, but each one is doing it with a little bit of a different variation. That's all when it comes to action. Action can either be unified, all conformist, or it can be with variations. However, when we talk about a feeling in the heart, a thought, a feeling, when we're talking about many people having a similar feeling, we know that our hearts, it says, the Torah tells us, Ein de'esem, that the opinions, our perceptions, our feelings are not unanimous, are not equal. And therefore there's many ways of absorbing, of expressing, of feeling. So then it would make sense when you talk about a feeling, we speak plural. That's why there's no question when we find that there's crossover between using plural and singular when describing a people, because both are true. A people represents a collective, a group of people that are doing something similar, living, doing the same thing. On the other hand, they're also made up of distinctly unique individuals. So both are true. There's a unanimity, and there's there's variances, there's difference. As we see in this pasuk. Let's go to the pasuk that people saw. People saw the great hand of Hashem. And they feared Hashem, and they believed in Hashem. The fact that they all saw, Vayar Yisro, they all saw the same thing. It was the same, Vayar. And we know that actually the vision at the Kriyas Yamsuf was so vivid that even a simple person saw what later prophets didn't see. In other words, it was something open to all to see. The seeing was unanimous by them all. But now you want to talk about the feelings they had? Oh, that's different. How much they feared and revered God based on their feeling? Everybody processes things differently. So Vayiru ha'am, they feared Hashem. Talk about believing in Hashem. Different levels. We think, we all believe in Hashem. Yes, but there's deeper levels of depth. And that's why it's a plural. Similarly, in our pasuk, the people saw the revelation at Sinai. It says the people saw in singular. Okay, they all saw the same thing. There was this major revelation, and they saw what there was to see. But now the reaction to it, vayanu, they trembled, they stood differently. There were actually different levels of being emotionally, the emotional upheaval that took place, the emotional effect that took place. And therefore, it makes sense to use, for describing the emotion, it makes sense to speak about in a singular, in a plural. So now, when we're talking about the pasuk, Paroi hikriv vav. When we talk about the pasuk, the Paroi came near, right? And the Bnei Yisrael lifted their eyes and they saw Mitzrayim he is traveling after them. The point is not so much on the singular. Rashi brings the achareim, after them. The agenda. It's not so much that they traveled singularly. It's that they're after them. Achareihem was where their singularity was, where their single-minded focus on the mission. What was the mission? To chase the Jews with hate, to get them back. Because remember, there was a reversal of Paroi and his servant's heart, and they were begging them to leave, and now they had a reversal. Now they all had this same passionate anger and desire to get the Jews back. So in the word Achareim, that's where they come together, in the pursuit after the Jews. When it comes to Paroi, Egypt himself, there were great distinctions. There was Paroi himself, there was the sorcerers, there were those, even in terms of relationship to Hashem. It says that there were some that feared Hashem words more, and that's why they got rid of they took in their cattle, because they knew there's gonna be the hail. Then there were those that didn't fear Hashem at all. So we have many different classes and levels in Mitzrayim itself. There were some that begged Paroi to release the Jews. But, so it should have said, technically, they were traveling, plural, because they weren't all of the same heart. However, Rashi says, I want to tell you something, there's a chidush here. When you talk about Achareim, when you talk about chasing the Jews, there was there was a oneness of opinion and of desire to carry this out. Chasing the Jews was not as you would think, that there were different levels of intensity, different levels of how much people were into it. Rashi says this word noiseya, which should have been noisim, the word noiseya tells us that when it came to achareim, when it came to chasing the Jews, they were leiv echad, they had one heart, unanimously, full of hatred to the Jewish people. And that's what caused them to be then united as one people. In other words, they gathered and united around the cause. In that cause, achareihem, the chase of the Jews, that was what united them. And that's why the order Rashi brings is b'leiv echad. He brings the word achareihem, because that's where they're united. Even though it says Mitzrayim, that's not the reason why it says Noiseya. The singular Noiseya, it should have said plural, because Mitzrayim is made up of all kinds of people. Talking here about a feeling of hatred. So Rashi says, there's something unique the Torah is telling us here. That when it came to the fight against the Jews, they were all of one heart. They gathered around the clarion call of get the Jews. And that made them like one people. It came because of the purpose first, their purposefulness, their desire to get the Jews. Now, let's look at it in our parsha. It's going to be a little different. When it says, Vayichan Sham Yisrael neged ha'hor. So first of all, the fact that it says that they camped, simply speaking, So the pasuk said that when it came to camping, vayachanu, they were a plural. Vayachanu b'midbar. That's why the pasuk says plural. They camped in the desert. So why does the pasuk now says and he camped in the desert? It must be coming to explain in what way did they camp. In what way did they at Har Sinai prepare for the receiving of the Torah? So 1 second. If you want to talk about a singular, because they're at Har Sinai and now preparing to receive the word of Hashem, and there's some kind of singularity there, how can that be? When it comes, if we're talking about differences in feelings, differences in level of understanding, so their encampment by the mountain is also made up of distinct groups of individuals. Moshe and Aaron, first of all, they had and the 70 elders, they had a much deeper understanding and perception of what was going on. And then you had other levels. We know that there was levels that even had doubting God after the Kriyas Samsov. They asked, Hayesh Hashem b'kirbenu, is Hashem in our midst? I mean, you had such a disparity amongst Bnei Yisrael. So it should have for sure said, Vayachanu Sham Yisrael neged Ahar, that they camped there by the mountain, because in their preparation for Sinai, there would have been so many different levels. As we said, it's not that they had to do one action. We're talking about soul preparation, about a state of being. So it shouldn't have been plural. So that's why Rashi says, no, he takes the word Vayichan Sham Yisrael, not the neged Ahar. When it comes to preparing for the mountain, you're right. Their relationship with the receiving of the Torah would have been very different in the different groups, different levels. But he says, Vayichan Sham Yisrael. Yisrael camped there. You know what it's telling us? That Yisrael was able to access their deepest essential Yisraelness, their Jewishness, which is unanimous between everybody. It wasn't about them accessing and talking about the external levels of how they're going to receive, what their level of preparation and readiness is for receiving the Torah. That they're very different levels. But Vayichan Sham Yisrael, that when it came to Yisrael, they encamped there, accessing their Yisraelness. Now this Achdus, there's a oneness that I was going to elaborate on it more. We are at the deepest essence part of one people. When the Nekudas Hayad, when the essence of our soul is there at the forefront, that's when we're a singular. This Achdus then brought out also a Belev Echad, that brought out and permeated us so that we, the Jewish people, could have a one heart, a one commonality of desire to receive the word of Hashem. And the Rabbi says here in Order 36, the reason we have to say this, that they were ki'ishach, not just with this one level of unity, they all felt part of one people, but they also now desired, this influenced and permeated them and brought them to have a unanimous desire, belev echad, a desire to receive the Torah of Hashem. We need to say this, although we do also realize there must have been differences between their level of readiness and level of appreciation of getting the Torah of Hashem. But the reason Rashi moves it into Levach, because if you don't say that, it should have said Vayachanu. In other words, when you talk about people camping, you're not just saying, you wouldn't just say that they camped singularly because they wore the same clothes. No. You want to talk about the totality of the person. What's very important is their heart. And if there's differences, there can be a machlokes, there can be an argumentativeness between a divisiveness between the parts, between the hearts. So the fact that the vayachanu is still, vayichan is still used, that tells us that it was a singularity, which starts, says Rashi, from the fact that they accessed, in the process of receiving the Torah, that deepest level of Yisraelness, but that also was able to permeate them, that for that time when they had to receive the Torah, they all had a leiv echad, they all had the same unanimous desire for Hashem to receive the Torah. Ches. So now this will explain why by Mitzrayim it says like one heart with one heart like one person, and by the Yidden it says like one person with one heart. Because by Mitzrayim, the fact that they were united as one, that came as a result of their unitedness in the purpose, the rallying around the purpose of their pursuit, which was the pursuit of the Jews. The hatred of the Jews was what brought them, in terms of their mission, they were mission oriented. The goal brought them to a unanimity, which is not, by the Yidden it was different. In our parsha, we're talking about the achdus, we're talking about the unification, like one person, is nothing to do with the fact that they're united with one goal. It's the fact that their essence is they're all one people. Ki ish echad, they're all Yidden. And therefore Rashi brings Vayichan Shom Yisrael. This is the quote he's bringing to tell us that they were all one people. Yisrael. That the Yisraelness of them is what makes their singularity. And that's what leads to, introduction to B'lev Echad also makes them a conformity of spirit where they all have the same heart to receive the Torah. Now, the Mechilta is not saying this. Remember, the Mechilta doesn't say Ki ish echad, b'leiv echad. It just goes right away to leiv echad. The Mechilta is saying that they're hushvu kulam leiv echad. They were all unanimous with one heart. In other words, they all had one heart and desire to receive the Torah. And that's why the Mechilta has to bring the pasuk Vayichan Shom Yisrael neged har. It's the har. They have a unanimity and a oneness, unitedness in the purpose of Har Sinai. Rashi didn't bring the har because it's not about the har. So now, basically, the Rebbe says in Orah 40, according to this Mechilta, when it says Vayichan Lashon Yachid, it's not because they become like one person. It's because they were united as one without machlekes. Right? They had shalom between them. And they had this oneness of heart. Rashi starts with the ish echad. So now, according to this, look at Orah 41. Lefi Zed, says the Rebbe, something startling. Mistaber Leimer, although if you wanted to bring a source for Rashi, you would say Mechilta in this case. No. It makes sense to say that the Makkah, the source of this Rashi, is not the Mechilta. There's other Midrashim to bring out the same point. Like in Orah 4, other Midrashim are quoted. It's pretty major statement here. Because the Rebbe is saying, the Mechilta is saying something else. Rashi is saying that they tapped into the Keish Echadness, the Yisraelness, which then led to the Leiv Echad. Test. According to all this, we can say that Rashi is saying two things. That he's saying that they're like one person, and that they're like one heart. The unanimity of the desire to receive the Torah. So now we'll also understand the Keifel Aloshan, the double expression in the continuation of Rashi. Remember, we pointed out that Rashi says all the other encampments were with grumbling and argumentativeness. Since the pasuk has emphasized that there, Vayichan Shom Yisrael, that there at Sinai, Yisrael was united, so we understand that it was only there. But all the other places were with grumbling and machlekes. What does that mean? He says, by all the other encampments, there was the opposite of unity in two things. First of all, there was machlekes between each other, the opposite of the oneness of ish. When you have argumentativeness between different Jews, so that means they're not feeling the Yisraelness, the oneness of people that's at the essence of their core. And there was also grumbling. Grumbling is complaining on God. In other words, they're the opposite of Leiv Echad, of the oneness of heart, in terms of their relationship with Hashem, that they're all totally devoted and wanting a deep relationship with Hashem. No, some could even question Hashem. So they didn't have. But the Mechilta doesn't bring the other point of Tar Oimes, of the grumbling against God. Because just like Vayichan, they also just say it's like oneness of person, so they just bring that the oneness of person was the Rebbe says in the Psikta, it does bring two things. It says the language he says there about the argument was they were argumentative, different opinions each with the other. And then there's another point, they said at all moments, let's go back to Egypt, which that's against Hashem. So there are other midrashim which bring out these 2 points. So Taremis and Machlekes is a grumbling against Hashem, which shows that they don't have Leiv Echad anymore to Hashem, and Machlekes, which shows that they're argumentative between itself. In other words, they're not feeling the Ish Echadness of their people. So we've explained all matters. Ish Echad Leiv Echad means that in the process of receiving the Torah, they all came together. They felt their oneness of people, which then led to them feeling their oneness in their rallying around their desire to receive the word of Hashem at Sinai. Yud, from the wine of Torah and this Rashi. So we have to understand that the world, the way it is, in and of itself, is called Reshus Harabim, a public domain. What is a public domain? Public domain means that there's a public there. There's a multiplicity. There's many different things that all coexist in the same sphere, but there's no unanimity between them. There's no unity between them. And this we see especially when it comes to the human kind. Hashem created people in a way that, by definition, they are not similar one to the other. We know that they don't look. Two people are never alike in their physical being, and also they're never fully alike in in their opinions, in their perceptions, their personalities. And this also has an effect on the way people act. People act based on intellectual and emotional understanding. If everybody's different, so no two people are going to do exactly the same thing. Actually, because people are so different, sometimes people can do exact opposites of each other. How can you bring all this disparity together as one? It can only be through the revelation of Hashem Echad. Hashem is one. He's higher than the world. He created a world with multiple aspects, and He is the simple unity above it all. So now we can understand the difference between the Mechilta and Rashi. The revelation of Hashem Echad in the world can be. It happens in two ways. There's two things that are considered to be precursors to the world, higher than the world: Torah and Yisro. The world is created for two things. The reason for the world's creation is the Torah and Yisro. The Yisro should fulfill the Torah, and the Torah should be given to Yisro. So, according to the Mechilta, the revelation of Matan Torah, or the giving of the Torah, which is higher than the world, it had such an effect on the Jews, even before receiving the Torah, that when they got on Rosh Chodesh, the first day of Sivan, 6 days before receiving the Torah, they came to the mountain of Sinai. They were already singular in their intention as well. Leiv Echad, they had one heart to receive the Torah. However, Rashi is speaking Pshut Shlamika, simple reading, simple commentary. Since it was still the time of pre-receiving the Torah, pre-giving the Torah, you can't say that they reached that the future revelation had such an effect on them that now they were totally like one in terms of intentionality. He says, no. The fact is that the oneness in them came from something that already existed within them. There was something at their core that they accessed at this stage that brought out their conformity with each other. The Yiddish and Neshama, which is higher than differences of opinions, there's Nekudas Hayadus, the essence, the point, the quintessential point, essential point of Yiddishkeit, which is there mainly when we talk about it. We talk about it mainly as being not in the brain, but being in the heart. That's what we say the neshama is. We attribute the neshama to being in the heart, and that's actually we say the nefesh kisses in the moyach. Anyway, so I'm sorry. I look at 53. There's a harder look at the hemshech of Ayin Beis, Shari Eir, and so on. So I guess for this aspect of Leiv, the Rebbe is sending us to look elsewhere in Hasidic talks. But at any rate, so the impact of Matan Torah wasn't yet coming from the outside. That was going to happen when Hashem gave the Torah. Right now, their journey of counting 7 weeks brought them to a place where they were able to uncover their deepest essential Yisrael aspect of being children of Israel in their heart. And that's really, that started becoming revealed when they left Mitzrayim. Ha'ara 54 tells us because that's when it was revealed that the Yidden were believers, children of believers. They activated something that started to bubble in them when they followed Moshe into the desert with absolute belief and trust and faith, without food. So now this has become developed, and it brought them 6 weeks later to the point where they're feeling their deepest essential Yisrael, their Jewness, and that makes them one with each other because there's no difference. At that deepest point, we're all unanimous. And this itself, when they reach that level to stand like one person, Ish Echad, because of the revelation that was out there and revealed by them, now this had the possibility to infiltrate even further and to permeate their actual conscious being, the Leiv Echad, that their heart should be a one heart for Hashem. Yud Aleph, even though when we talk about the real unity. In this case, we're talking about it being something that's unique to to Yahadus, to the Jewish spark, because the Jew has what's called Yichida Shebenefesh, the existential piece of God within his soul. And this is something that only exists in the souls of Yidden, souls of Jewish people. Nonetheless, since there is the process, there's Zelu Mazer Selikim, Hashem made a balanced world, and therefore He created multiple levels, and there's always, for the level and for what exists in the Jewish world, there's always something that exists in the mundane world. So at least something similar to this concept of unity is also to be found by non-Jews, because we know that the concept of klippa, the shell, the peel, although it's protecting, it's an outer level of what's inside the peel, which is the fruit. So the fruit is like the neshamas Yisro. The peel is the outside, but it's always going to be, try and be similar and have similar contours of the inner fruit. So the external peel is going to be similar, just like we have, the Rebbe quotes here a very fascinating thing, just like we have a monkey, apes that look like people. There's a medrash, a fascinating medrash. I don't know if I understand it. I hope I'm not opening up a topic here that I can't really explain. Hora 60 brings that there's a Maimer Azal, there's a medrash on the pasuk in Bereshis 5, chapter 5, verse 3, that in the beginning, the very beginning of creation, there was a stage where people were like kaifim, like monkeys. I'm not sure what that means, how that ties in to the 6 days of creation where man is created as man. You can further look in that medrash, but it's an interesting concept. At any rate, so there's, in other words, there's various levels, and there's the contours, there's the inner fruit, there's the contours of the peel, which fits just like the fruit. So that tells us, from this we understand, that also in Mitzrayim there was a similar concept as there was by Bnei Yisrael. There was the concept of Belev Echad, of one heart, which caused the oneness of people. In other words, as we said, there's a difference though. By non-Jews, this unity that comes from the deepest existential spark of Jewishness that makes us all one people, that doesn't exist. Where can the oneness come from? The oneness will come from a commonality of goals. When there's Belev Echad, when there's one heart, in other words, one unified desire and mission, approach to something, then there can be a unity that makes them also like one person. However, by Yidden, since the essence of their being is this spark of Hashem in their soul, so there can be a ke'ish echad, there can be a oneness of person even without the commonality of mission, or the same, the same commitment to the mission. Yud Beis, even though true, and here's a call to action, amazing call to action. Yud Beis, even though that the true unity we just said exists by Yidden, exists by Jews because of the Yechida, because of that deep level, the fifth level of soul, which is a uniquely Jewish component of soul, and that's not applicable to non-Jews. Nonetheless, the whole purpose of the world is for humankind to make a difference, right? So Matan Torah achieved, what did it do? It got rid of the Bittul Agzera, got rid of that decree, that curfew, so to speak, which was disturbing and which was separating between the higher worlds and lower worlds, between godly Hashem and the created beings. So now at Har Sinai, Hashem says, I'm ripping away that border, that border, that impenetrable border. Heaven and earth can now wed, can now come together, can now merge. This had its effect also, not just for the Jewish people, but also for Bnei Noach, for the children of Noach, for all the nations of the world, that they should also be able to access the Koyach Eloki, to be able to comprehend and feel and access the godly spirit, which is enclosed in them as well. So Matan Torah, the giving of Torah, was a big day for the entire humanity. And through the fact that they hear and comprehend and feel the godly spirit in them, the godly spirit is all about unity. Hashem is oneness. So therefore, by them too there can be the achievement of a certain level of oneness, similar to the oneness of the Jewish people, but not mamish, not literally like it, because they're not able to have the perception, which a Yid is able to have, the perception of the levels of God that are totally transcendent from the world. That's a gift that the Yiddish Neshama gets. They can understand the levels of God that are relating to the world, but it's that level that's transcendent, that's the level that can truly impress upon a person, at least subconsciously, the achdus, the true achdus, that there's total oneness, no division whatsoever. But we said that every human being can come to at least something of that, a portion of that, to understand, to come to understanding the Hashem in him, and therefore come to the oneness of Hashem and the oneness in creation. Says the Rebbe, this concept that after Matan Torah also non-Jews have a connection to the godliness in them, which is higher than Seichel. God is higher than intellect, and it's higher than division. So there's actually a halacha that is expressed by this gift that was given to Matan Torah. There's now a practical application that applies to all of human beings. That when they come to fulfill the Sheva Mitzvah, the 7 laws given to the children of Noach, given to humanity, it has to be not mipnei hechra hadas, not because it makes sense, and not even mitzad dem tzivu, because Hashem told Adam Arishan and Noach. It has to be because shetziva. There's some quoting now the Lashon Rambam. The Rambam says the reason that the world has to do the Sheva Mitzvah is shetziva HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'hem b'Torah, because Hashem instructed that in the Torah that was given at Har Sinai. When he made it known through Moshe Rabbeinu that the children of Noach were, in a previous stage in history, instructed in these mitzvahs. But it comes not because they make sense, not because Adam and Noach was commanded about it, but because Moshe Rabbeinu now made it part of the Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu now brought it down at the same time he brought down the Torah. And since everybody has to say the world is created for me, so therefore, in other words, everything in the world is in order for me to transform this multiplicity, the Reshus HaRabim, the public domain, to transport it, transfer it, transform it into a oneness, into a private domain, the oneness of Hashem. So therefore, we can't say, oh, I'm not interested in doing my mission in the world. So every Yid has to try as much as he's able, not just to spread Torah and Yiddishkeit between fellow Jews, but also to have an effect on the children of Noach and all of humankind, that they should fulfill their Sheva mitzvahs, their 7 mitzvahs. And they should do it in a way where they're doing it because Hashem so said in the Torah. In other words, they should thereby access the Hashem in them, which is higher than intellect, higher than understanding. And that's what enables them to also bring a sense of unity and oneness into their world. That's Lach in the mission.